Hi, I'm Henry Goldenberg, and we have the pleasure here of having Dave Bloom doing a video on the community and the Jewish ancestors, should they be here still, and it gives me pleasure to be interviewed by Dave. So going to my family, the Goldenberg family, I think we're the only one in the whole of Zimbabwe. And I do recall when we first arrived here, and I was only 11 years old, but I'll tell you how we got here. They wanted to cut my name, to shorten the name from Goldenberg to Gold or Goldstein or something, you know. And of course my dad says, no, my name is Goldenberg, you know. And we had a laissez-passer to get here. Right, so we come from Egypt. Right, so that's basically where we come from. My grandparents, on my mother's side, my grandfather was born in Corfu, and his name was Isaac Mizan. My grandmother was born in Constantinople, and I don't know the surname. In fact, I never met her. And from there, they obviously met in Alexandria. The year, I don't know, but they had 6 children. My mom being the youngest, born in Alexandria. So there was one son, Armando, and then the girls, Rita, Julia, and so on. On my father's side, my grandfather, who I never met, so my grandmother as well, I never met them. They were born in Bucharest, in Romania. And they had 2 siblings that were born there. The rest of them were born in Cairo. So this is where our grandparents eventually came from, right? From Egypt. So my grandfather, obviously born in Bucharest, and before the name Goldenberg must have meant that he was a jeweler, by the way. That's all I know about him. As I said, I never met any of my grandparents except for my mom's side, Isaac, you know, who was born in Corfu, right? And then they went all to Egypt, I would imagine, during the pogrom time. So my mom is the youngest of the 6, and my dad is the youngest of the 6, right? And I was born in Cairo. My dad and my mom were very, very active. They loved, my mom in fact was a very, very bright student, and she wanted to go to the Sorbonne in Paris. But the bigger brother, the older brother, said, no, look, you must get married and have a family, and, you know. So this is how, and she met with my dad, who was an interpreter in the British Army and worked not drapery, how do you, not clothing stores, in departmental stores, and he was very, very well known, and that's what he did. But they both spoke 6 languages, you know. They were good, and yeah. So when they did meet, they decided to marry, and they married in 1943, right, at the Ismaili synagogue in Cairo. I was born 1945 in Cairo, and I went to school there. My mom worked at a Banque Belge d'Egypte. She was a private secretary of the general manager. My dad kept on doing what he was doing in the departmental stores. I went to school, Lycée Français du Caire, and yeah. We left Cairo during the Sinai campaign. Fortunately enough, we weren't expelled as such, but we were given 3 months to leave. So in my one day, I think the most social in Cairo, as a youngster, I remember, was with friends and family. We had a lot of family on both sides, my mom and my dad. Friday nights we used to go to my uncle and have a musical evening. Apart from having 20 family members there, my uncle Raoul, my dad's brother, he used to play the cello. My cousin Robert was on the violin, and his sister Liliane played the piano. So after dinner and everything, we were having tea in these big Russian glasses, whatever they were called us, and of course listening to the music, and it was fantastic, you know. And yeah, so that's social, a lot of cinemas and that type of thing. And I remember the one day we were going back from going home, and we had to pass the road where the Royal Automobile Club was situated. And as we were walking, I was always in front of my parents. I must have been about 8 or 9 at the time, 8 I think, yeah. And there was a red carpet, and I was about to cross it when the policeman, or what we call a shawish, stopped me, and he said, "You can't go over this." And I just wondering why I couldn't do that, you know. In the meantime, my parents caught up, and I started crying. And they said, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" So the shawish, the policeman said, No. The King Farouk is about to leave, and he can't cross it because he's coming now." So all of a sudden, the king of Egypt, you know, we're gonna see him. As he came down, he had his fez and whatever, and he stopped right by me. And he looked at me, and he looked at my parents, and, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And he took and he felt my hair, and he says, "You're blonde. You could be a Bosch." You know, and I had longish hair before I had a haircut. So, and in fact, my mom still got a piece of my hair, my late mom, and I've got it in a piece of newspaper. One of the reasons we left Egypt, a lot of Jewish families were literally expelled, but we were fortunate that we had like about 3 or 4 months to pack up and go. You know, it was very, very hard. It was very, very difficult for both my parents. My dad he ran a shop. Whether it belonged to him or not, I've never known. But I would imagine it did, right? So he asked me to go with him to the shop. So, and I said, yeah, let's go. You know, he was going to introduce me to so we walked to the shop. It wasn't too far away, I would say a few kilometers, So we get there, and outside the windows were painted black. All the windows were painted black, you know, with a cross. And there was a soldier or a policeman standing there in front of the door, the entrance door. And he said, "Effendi," he knew my dad, Willie. You know, he knew my dad. He says, "What's going on?" He says, "Sorry, it doesn't belong to you anymore." So it was like "surcresté," how you say in English, "surcrested" or whatever, you know. Oh my God! So what happened? He said, "Let's go home." We couldn't do anything. And I said, "Dad, what's happening?" That's all in French, because that's what we spoke, French. You know, I am French speaking, my maternal language. And so we went home. We go, and Mom was in the kitchen. Yeah, and I remember this like it was yesterday. Sorry. So when we got home, my mom was in the kitchen, making the meals for the weekend. And she said to my dad, she said, "What are you doing here so early?" He says, "Well, we have no business left. They've closed it all up. They've painted it. They've done that, and that's it. Nothing belongs to us anymore." And she screamed and screamed and screamed, and she fell on the floor. My dad tried to pick her up, and oh God, you know, I ran to the room, crying and was wondering what the hell is going on and what's going to happen next as such. So that was a bad ordeal. And then we found out that it was time to go. How did we find out was, and where to go was a big problem. We had relatives on my dad's side in Bulawayo, the Davises, Lou and Zomvel. And they were corresponding. There was no telephone, there was all faxes and, not faxes, what do you call these things? The post office, telegrams and that, saying you better think about leaving because things are not that great and you should come here. And that was in Bulawayo. The year now we're looking at now is now 56, going on to 57. And it was during the Sana campaign where Egypt was for Egyptians and only Egyptians. So the French, the British, not so much the Greek people that lived there, but mostly French, English, and the Jewish. There was a big population in Cairo, especially over 70, 80,000, if I remember. Lots of shul, synagogues, both Sephardics and Ashkenaz. So my dad, to enable us to go, right, was he had to get a trade. So he went in the evenings to learn a trade, and that was mechanic. That was the easiest way to get into southern Rhodesia and to go into Bulawayo at the time. So he did. In the evenings, he used to go and come back. And now what do we do with everything? Mom didn't know. We had the most beautiful home, I remember. The furniture, it was whatever possessions we had. And I remember only were able to take 60 pounds of weight of clothing, whatever you put in a suitcase, and 25 pounds of cash. That's all we were allowed to have. So all our possessions, whatever, we just couldn't take with us. In fact, we were able to take a radio, right, a little Philips radio, which I've still got. Right, a little Philips radio. How we got that, and I think my mom put a small pot in there, a couple of spoons and forks, and we didn't know what was happening, going to another country. So, never had a passport, but we had to have a laissez-passer, right? And this is how the family. My mom was pregnant now, right, of my twin sisters, and I think she must have been, we left in July 1957. That's right. So my sisters were born in September. Yeah, must have been about 4 months pregnant or so. But the worst thing was that how we left at the airport, right? We eventually get to the airport, right? Had a Dakota, we had to go into a Dakota, right? Those planes like that. My mom and I went up, right, and my dad wasn't allowed to get in. Of course, there was screams and shouting and everything. My mom started beating people up. She says, "Let me out. I'm not leaving without my husband." And, in front of us, and I'll never ever forget this, was a French professor who was a family member of my grandparents, right? And he knew my dad. They actually tore his shirt. They tore his shirt, right, through his medical. That's all he had. He was leaving for France, and he had his medical case with him. They took everything out. He says, "Leave me one thing," and that was a stethoscope. He says, "That's how I'm going to leave." "No, you must put another shirt on." He says, "No, that's how I'm leaving. I'm going to go to France this way." But that's how it was. The plane was full. 2 little seater we had, my dad and my mom, and I was in the middle somewhere, and my mom was pregnant. And of course, I'd never been on a plane. Of course, the vomiting and this, and not very good. First stop was Khartoum. In Khartoum, we were there. There was no accommodation, but we found accommodation on a Nile boat or whatever it was, hot and mosquitoes and what have you. The next day we got onto the plane and we went to Nairobi in Kenya. We were there just for the day. That was our first meal we had, right? First meal I remember. And then from there we took a Constellation. I think it was a KLM, I'm not too sure. I think it was a KLM. And we went from there to Salisbury, Bulawayo. And that's just how we got to Bulawayo. So going to the Sinai campaign, I mentioned the Sinai campaign, yes. Why it derived from there is because when Nasser took power, and he said Egypt for Egyptians and only Egyptians, right? So he nationalized everything. And I think this is the beginning of how my dad's shop got, and sequestered. Sinai campaign. Nasser takes over, nationalizes everything. Israel, France, the British were in the background. Israel came, they took over literally the Sinai campaign. They could have taken the whole of Egypt. But America stepped in there and said, stop, go back. We don't want you to invade Egypt. Otherwise that'll start another war. And this is what happened. Basically, that's what I know. Maybe the books will say something different, but that's what I know. Okay? You see, so having nationalized the country and the Suez Canal, now the involvement of the British of the Suez Canal was a passage to go to Europe, to go everywhere. And of course, this is a very, very important whatever, And that's basically the reason why most of the Jews and French and the British left Egypt. Right, so we get to Bulawayo, but at the airport, I was wearing my +4s. I used to wear +4s, right, and it was really it was hot, hot going on to cold, if I remember. But I had that. My mom had this coat. I don't know if I still got that coat. I don't know. My dad had his wedding suit on. This is because the more we wore, it will be less to put. We can put more in the suitcases because we only had 60 pounds in weight. So we get to the airport and we go through the immigration and custom. And the funny thing is with me is that now I'm looking at the people and I'm looking at the African there, It wasn't like in Egypt. I mean, I said, wow, look at that. I remember the Sudanese, they were dark, but wow, these are different guys. And that language, how they talk like that. So I started laughing. My dad took me by the side and he gave me a whack. And I said, wow, why are you hitting me, Dad? Why are you hitting me? He says, because that's the way they talk here. You mustn't make fun of them, But so having said that, a car from my Uncle Lou was supposed to meet us at the airport. I'll never forget, it was a brown Chev 1954 model, They came to fetch us to take it to their house. And they lived in Matopos, right? They had a house there. My Uncle Lou he was a director at Archer Clothing. And so we got there. My mom, as I said, was pregnant with my sisters. Of course, it was a hell of a reunion because we were there from Egypt, from Alexandria. They had a lovely home there. We used to go there for holidays. So we get there, and he says, right, what's happening? We said, well, we got a home to go to, and you got everything organized for us. So where is it? She says, sorry, we couldn't get a home, but we've got you a hotel room in I think it was in Jameson Street, called the White House Inn in Jameson Street. Okay, so we couldn't do anything else. Is right. He says, until we find something for you. So we get to the White House Hotel, and there was one bed. The one bed was my mom, my dad, and I was in the middle. As I said, my mom was pregnant, so it was pretty difficult. In the meantime, through the Jewish Board of Deputies in Bulawayo, and I must say, and I will say a million times, they were most fantastic jewelry. It was unbelievable what they were trying to do for us, Eventually, I got to Mrs. Abram, and I'll never forget Mr. Wagner and all that, So I went to school, non-speaking at all. I spoke French. That was my maternal language. No English, not a word, not even a good morning or a good evening. I didn't speak English, but my parents did, fluently, and write it, of course. I managed to get to enroll me at junior school. That was Baines Junior School, and I think this is where our lives actually started now, because in a strange country, southern Rhodesia, right, Bulawayo, and I got to school and standard 4, and the master was Mr. Dwyer. I'll never forget that, Mr. Dwyer, and he sat me right in front, and I sat next to a guy, right? It was co-ed at junior school there, and I sat next to this guy. We look at each other, he looks at me, we give each other a smile, and says, I said, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, And I must have had a Magen David here or something, because he was there, and he goes like this, he goes, and I went, so we had the Star of David, He said, oh, you Jewish, and we became the biggest friends, right? And the family, and they were the Levine family. It was unbelievable what they did for us, helping with literally everything. Harry Levine had Fortwell Trading in Fort Street, right? My dad had to get a job through the Jewish Board of Deputies. They gave him a job at Arenal Sweets. They found a job at Arenal Sweets, and he had to sell sweets, right? That was basically what his job was. So he walked from Fort Street, from Jameson Street, I think it was, the White House Hotel, to Arenal, right? Early in the morning to get there. And he had a little school case, and that was full, the sweets and the penny cools, and what penny cools is the fish, digger balls, and all he had to do was go along Jameson, Fort Street, Lobangula Street, walk, and then he would go back to the hotel. In the morning, he would go back to Arenal Suites, right, and say, right, this is what I did, and then go back again, So it was a hell of a journey. So walking didn't do much good to my dad, but having met the Levines, who had Fortwell Trading, he offered my dad a bicycle. It was a Rudge bicycle, and my dad says, I can't take the bicycle, Harry, because I can't afford to pay it. So I said, no, don't worry, you can pay me when you want. So eventually, he didn't pay for the bicycle. It was given to him. And from school, I couldn't wait for my dad to come home so I could ride it. And of course, becoming very, very friendly with the Levines. And he's the one that got me into the movement of Betar. Now my sisters are born, right? Sally and Carol were born on the 9th of September 1957. Twin sisters, right? Without the Levines, we wouldn't have done anything, and they were unbelievable. They did literally everything for us. Till eventually they found an apartment in 4th Street called JHMS Court. They supplied everything for us, whatever it was. They were very, very good and lovely people. I still went to Baines, and I went to Milton Senior for the first term. My dad, in the meantime, left Arenal Suites and got a job at Kaufman and Sons, right? And he was an inside salesman. After a year or so, they asked him if he would like to move to Salisbury. And the reason being is that he spoke languages, right? He was good, and especially Greek. And here there were a lot of Greek people, a lot of Greek, had shops and, and they said, you'd be better off here. And of course, we came to Salisbury. Missing my friends in Bulawayo. Some of them, they were the most fantastic jewelry, most beautiful people, and still are, So I came to Salisbury with my parents and went to school, to Prince Edward School, and I finished off there, right? 1963 and 63. And I said I wanted to start working, and I couldn't get a job anywhere because my dad was only working, and he was a sales rep, right, at Kaufman's, and there wasn't enough funds coming in. So I said I want to work and help out. So I couldn't get a job because I didn't do my army training. So I did my army training, and I finished off in 64. It was 4.5 months at Llewellyn Barracks, and I got a job eventually at. My first job, it was at Lesovsky Brothers, right, with Mervyn Lesovsky. And I said to him, please, Mr. Lesovsky, there's one thing I want to ask you. Can I go to Machane? All right? He says, sure. You Habonim or you Betar? I said, I go to Betar. He looked at me. He said, no. He's a very big, anyway, so he said, of course you can go, Henry, okay, but as soon as you come back, you're going to put your head down and start working. I was with them for three years, and I wanted to better myself instead of just being an inside salesman, which eventually I did. So I went from one to another and ended up 1970. I didn't work all the time with Lesovsky Brothers. I became with Al Hyman. I had a job with Al Hyman, but nothing was really kosher with any of them, So I decided to move on. So in 1970, I went to South Africa. I went to Johannesburg. I said, the land of gold, I'm sure I'll do something there. And I got a beautiful position becoming an agent with an agent representing the biggest clothing manufacturer in Cape Town for the whole of South Africa. And I was an agent with Sam Hoppen. He said to me, Goldie, I'm going to go back to London and I want you to run all the offices. You got all the lines, you know exactly what's going on, and I'm very, very happy with you. That was just about 2 years. My dad passed away, unfortunately, in 1972, and I came back to look after my mom and my sisters, who were at the time 13 years old. So I started working, and how I got the job was through the Zionist office where Gabe Hamovitz was. And I said to Pearl Menashe, I said, Pearl, I'm here, right, if there's anything comes up, please let me know. She says, shit, Goldie, yeah, I'm sorry about your dad and whatever. And she calls me. She says, you must phone Bernstein Manufacturers, right, and speak to Mrs. Smith. And I said, okay. Phone Mrs. Smith, are you Henry Goldenberg? I said, yes. She says, Mr. Myers wants to see you now. I put on a suit and off I went. I had the interview, and I got the job, right? 1968, I went to the UK for 2 years, and I met Daniel and his brother, the Myers family, and we stayed in the flat. And this is how, I suppose, one thing developed into another. And when I went to see Eddie Mayer for the interview, right, and I got the position, right, as a traveling salesman. And I was with him like 14 years. One to another, how shall I say, and this is, I did well in South Africa, but Mom needed me here, right, and my sisters. So I took a role over my dad. It was difficult, it wasn't easy, 1968, when I was away in the UK, my parents built this house, right, which my wife Lorraine and I are living in now. says, he must come to the camp, he must come to East London, I'll look after him, you know. So my English wasn't great still at the time, you know. So my mom said yes. I think we went by train to East London. We were given pocket money. I don't know how much I had, £1.50 or whatever it was. I don't know, you know. We couldn't afford more. And I went to my first Betar camp, the 3rd East London camp. And I actually went to 10. I ended up with going to 10 machanot, you know. And the rest of them were all in PE. So the one I'll never forget, Yachil was the shaliach at the time. And we get tuck boxes. The truck would come, right, and hoot, and all the Betarim used to go there and saying, where's my tuck box? You know, the parents used to bring tuck box or money or sweets or chocolates or whatever. So I go, and the first time there was nothing for me. So I go back to the tent and carried on with whatever we had to do. Another truck comes along another week later, and my name was mentioned. I go and get my little packet like this, and I quickly ran to the tent, right? And it was so funny. And I quickly opened it. I was on my own in the tent. Ralph he used to stay with me, you know, was camping with me. We lived together in the tent. And I slowly opened it up, and I had to go to the bloody loo, didn't I? And I said, oh God, I must go to the bogs. So I quickly ran to the bogs. And when I came back, I saw Ralph Lerman on my stretcher, started eating my sweets. And I went mad. I went crazy. I went and I jumped on him. I put him on the floor and I wanted to strangle him. You know, how are you eating? But not in English. I must have been in French or something, or Arabic. And I was just mad that he was eating my chocolates that my parents gave me, you know, sent me, you know. Who stopped us was Morris Strauss. He was in Kanaim. Okay, so he came and he said, no, Gold, stop. Anyway, we ended up as great friends, Ralph and I, you know. We're going, Betar was my life, okay. And then when we moved to Salisbury, of course I joined Betar, and going to little seminars. I met a lot of Betarim from Salisbury when I was in Bulawayo. And of course they were great guys, and my best friend Morris Aladef and I were just like best buddies, you know. We used to sing at Betar camps and whatever. I went to 10 camps, and I got my little badge, all in Port Elizabeth. And I even went on to A-Guard. I went on an A-Guard. Twice I went on A-Guard. The one year I got the Fellowship Cup. And I was more than happy that all the Chanichim and all that were all voted for Goldie, you know. Anyway, one of those. It was fantastic. It was my life. The one time Mrs. Cass said to my mom, please, we'd like Henry to join Betar in Israel, and that was impossible. That was never, you know. That's my son. How can you take him away? And you know. So I never made it. But my family on my mother's side, they left Egypt and went to settle in Israel, you know. And a lot of family I've still got there, on my cousins. Yeah. And I got friends. I got a lot of friends in Israel, you know. And I mean, I loved Israel. Went to a reunion there about 15 years ago, meeting all the guys, most of them that we met at camps, you know, and seeing photographs of the campfires and all that was just fantastic. Being in Betar, we used to have our meetings when we, you know, the Bnei Etzel, and we used to go to the Kasser's house. We used to have our meetings on a Sunday night. Going on about our situation here, I must say it wasn't we were comfortable, but not plush, if you know what I'm saying. So we made do. We always had food on the table. We provided for my sisters. My mom, it was a bit difficult for me because I was the only bread earner when my dad passed away. Eventually, I asked my sisters, I think you should go and live in South Africa, go to Joburg. In fact, they did that at the age of about 17 and 18 years old. That's when I started getting my mom ready to go to South Africa, and then we would rent this place and we'd get some kind of income. And of course, I was working. That was a life of mine at that time. And then in the last Jewish community, shall I say, the Jewish community here was always between both the Sephardic community and the Ashkenazi community. At the time, there was 7,500 Jewish people. I say we're a population of about 3.5 in Salisbury. It was a big population. Yom Ha'atzmaut at the Guild, at the Rhodes Memorial Hall, in Betar, Habonim, and that. It was fantastic. Everybody knew each other. Today it's a bit different. I think there must be about 60 odd people. I think maybe left in people. I'm talking about in Harare, and we have alternate Shabbat shul. Between the Sephardics and the Ashkenazi shul. We used to have a Shabbat on a Friday night, but there's no longer. And sometimes we do make a minyan, and sometimes we don't. All right? I met Lorraine years and years and years and years ago. I knew of Lorraine, my wife, at shul, at Salisbury Street, the Ashkenazi shul, when she used to go there and looking gorgeous, and I always used to say, my goodness, who's this good-looking girl? It was always at the back. We used to sit at the back with Mike Cohen, Danny Cass, and myself, And then she used to leave a little bit early, and I don't know why, but anyway, so afterwards and after the shul service, I was looking to see where she was, but she was never there. Anyway, so I knew of Lorraine, and thank God we met up again about 22, 23 years ago, right? We started going out, and at the age of 60, we were here, had my 60th birthday, and this is when I asked her to marry me. So now we're married now 20 odd years. 1st of March will be 21 years, and we're as happy as can be, I am like retired, and so is my wife. But I must say, though, we were both involved. We still are involved in the chevra, small, very very small, hand by hand. We try and see and do the best we can. I loved my sport. I used to play a lot of wingate, tennis. Then, unfortunately, a lot of the players left the club and started playing in their own courts. And I used to captain and started a league side there and everything else. So 1972, everyone was literally from 20 odd players. We turned out about 5 or 6 players, and you couldn't enjoy, playing on a Saturday afternoon, social. So I started playing golf, and in 1972 I started playing golf, and I loved my golf, and yeah, and so and I was on the committee meetings, and I started playing nomads, and I just enjoyed it. And socially, I still played a bit of tennis. Today I don't anymore. I don't have many hobbies. I like my garden, and we had a lot of friends. We used to have gatherings here on a weekend, have big braais and that. Now we don't, because our friends are not here anymore. They've all left. And I must say, though, we've only got maybe not even a handful of friends, but we know so many people. But Kate, Victor, and Ilana are very good friends of ours, and they're very dear friends. And we see them pretty often. And go to shul on a Saturday. Yeah, and that's is what we do. Not much besides that. I have a little dog. His name is Toki. He's my best friend. Yeah, yeah, and we travel. Well, we do go, and we got families in South Africa, in Australia, in England, in America, Israel, and Greece. You know, and but we're looking to do another trip soon, please God. You know, yeah, and that's what I have to say. This is how we came, and what we're doing at the moment in Zimbabwe. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Dave.